The word your English Bible translates as speechless is the same Greek word Jesus used to muzzle a storm. Not silence, not embarrassment, a muzzle. The same verb, the same grammatical force applied to a man standing in a banquet hall who showed up without the right garment. That is Matthew 22, verse 12. The parable of the wedding feast. And the Greek in this passage dismantles everything you were taught about many called few chosen. The king calls the garmentless man friend, but the Greek word is not the word for friend. It is the exact word Jesus uses to address Judas at the betrayal. Same word, same cold register, same thing follows. And chosen at the end of this parable has never meant what your church told you it meant. The Greek does not describe a selection. It describes a quality, a condition, a readiness. We are going to walk this parable verse by verse. The feast that was already finished before anyone arrived. The highways with a Greek word that changes who the invitation reaches. The garment that Paul connects to an entirely different letter. And the muzzle that links a wedding guest to a silenced demon. And at the end, one practice, under 5 minutes, built from a single Greek phrase in this passage that you can carry into any room you walk into today. Let us start with the feast. Matthew 22, verses 1 through 4. A king prepares a wedding feast for his son. The Greek word is gamos. It appears 16 times in the entire New Testament. 8 of those 16 are concentrated in this one parable. That is the densest use of gamos in all of Scripture. And gamos does not just mean a party or a reception. The root carries the sense of binding, of union. This is not a social event. It is a covenantal encounter. The setting of the entire parable is union. You know this feeling. The difference between an event on your calendar and a moment that will change something permanently if you show up to it fully. Gamos names the second one, a gathering where something is being joined that cannot be unjoined. Now verse 4. The king says, "My oxen and fattened cattle have been slaughtered." The Greek is tethymena, already done, already completed. The sacrifice is not in progress, it is finished. Then hetoimos, everything is ready. Already prepared, not being prepared, not coming together, done. The feast is finished before a single guest sits down. That matters for everything that follows. Nobody needs to prepare anything. Nobody needs to bring anything. Nobody needs to earn a seat. The table is set, the sacrifice is complete. The only remaining question is whether you walk through the door. Now the detail that rewrites the whole parable. Verse 3, the king sends servants to call those who had been invited. Your English makes that sound like the first call, a fresh invitation to people who do not know about the feast yet. The Greek says something different. The word is keklemenus. It describes a state already in effect. These guests were already invited before the story begins. They already received the word. They already said yes. This is the second call, the follow-up. The "it is time," the feast you agreed to attend is ready call. Their refusal is not ignorance. It is the betrayal of a prior yes. You know this. You have agreed to something when it was far away, when the cost was theoretical, and then backed out the moment it became real and present. That is the state this perfect tense is naming. Not people who never heard, people who already committed and then chose not to show. The feast is ready, the sacrifice is finished. Nobody has to earn a seat. And the people who already said yes are about to do something the Greek calls amelisanthes. It does not mean they refused. It means something worse. Matthew 22, verse 5. And they amelisanthes went away, one to his field, one to his business. Your English says they made light of it. They paid no attention. They did not regard it. The Greek is sharper. Amelisanthes comes from meaning not, and the verb melo, meaning to care. The negation of caring. They did not argue with the invitation. They did not challenge it. They did not even hate it. They simply did not care. That is the devastation of amelisanthes. Active rejection at least acknowledges the invitation exists. Amelisanthes is the moment the invitation arrives and you glance at it and keep moving. The call comes and you look at it and set it down. Not hostility, apathy. And in the structure of the parable, apathy is the first and most common form of refusal. You know this. Not the dramatic rejection of something important, the quiet drift, the slow forgetting. The thing you said yes to that you let die by simply not caring enough to show up. Amelisanthes names that drift. Then the king acts. Verse 7, He sends armies and destroys the murderers. Verse 8, the wedding is ready, but those invited were not axioi, not worthy, not weighty enough. They did not carry the gravity of the occasion. And verse 9, the pivot. Go to the Decoded ton hodon, the exits of the highways, and the word for highways here is hodos. That word matters enormously. Hodos is the word used in John 14 verse 6 when Jesus says, I am the way. It is the word used in Acts chapter 9 verse 2, where early Christianity is literally called the way, hey hodos. The invitation goes to the crossroads of the hodos, to the place where every path converges, the most open, most public, most universal location imaginable. The invitation that was first given to those who already said yes now goes to everyone standing at the exits of the way, and the text tells you exactly who shows up. Verse 10, the servants gathered all they found, both poneris and agathos, evil and good. Poneris, that word should stop you. It is the same Greek word used for the evil one in Matthew 13 verse 19, the same word used for the devil himself in the parable of the sower. Not slightly flawed people, not morally ambiguous people, explicitly wicked people. And they feast, they sit at the table, they eat the prepared meal, they recline in the hall of the king. Nobody checks their past at the door, nobody asks for a resume. The hall fills with the evil and the good side by side, and nobody, not a single one of the poneris guests, is thrown out for being wicked. This is the detail that should stop every sermon that reads this parable as a morality filter. The evil feast, the good feast. Everyone feasts, which means the man who gets thrown out in the very next verse is not removed for wickedness. He is removed for something else entirely, something that has nothing to do with how good or bad he is. And this is where the most quoted line in the parable finally makes sense. Verse 14, many are kletoi, but few are eklektoi. Your English says called and chosen. Two categories. One group got the invitation. Another group got selected by sovereign decree. As if God held a lottery, and only some names were drawn. But the Greek is doing something your translation hides completely. Kletoa comes from kaleo, to call, to summon, to invite. It describes the state of having been invited, the general call. Everyone heard it. Everyone in the hall was kletoi. Eklektoi comes from a different verb entirely. Eklegomai, to choose out, to select, to pick for quality. It does not share a root with kletoi. But Matthew places these two words side by side in the same sentence deliberately. The phonetic echo between kletoi and eklektoi would have landed immediately for a Greek-speaking audience. Invited versus selected, summoned versus refined. A Greek hearer would catch the contrast instantly. Two different words placed together on purpose, the invited versus the fitted. And here is the part that demolishes the divine lottery reading. Every church teaches chosen as if God pointed at people and said, you are in, you are out. But Thayer's lexicon defines eklektos not just as chosen, but as select, choice, pure. Quality language. Language describing what someone has become, not what was arbitrarily done to them. And look at how Thayer draws the contrast in Matthew 22, verse 14. The eklektoi are those who have become true partakers of the Christian salvation. The kletoi are those who have been invited, but who have not shown themselves fitted to obtain it. Read that again. The many are defined by what they lack, fitness, readiness. The few are defined by what they carry. If the kletoi failed because they were not fitted, then the eklektoi passed because they were fitted, not randomly picked, not arbitrarily separated. The contrast Thayer draws points to readiness as the dividing line, and the parable proves it. Evil people feast. The garmentless man does not. The filter is not morality, it is what you are wearing. You know the difference between being picked for a team and being ready to play. One is external and completely out of your hands. The other is a state you carry in your body before anyone calls your name. Eklektos names the second one, the readiness, the quality. In this reading, the garment corresponds to the inner state one carries into the encounter, not behavior, not moral performance. Condition, what you are wearing inside when you walk through the door. This is correspondence, not medical claim. Map, not prescription. We are decoding a text, not prescribing a treatment. The evil feast, the good feast, and one man among them all singled out, not for wickedness, for what he is not wearing. But before the king addresses the garment directly, he calls the man a name. and the Greek word he uses is the same word spoken to Judas in the garden. Matthew 22, verse 11. The king comes in to look at the guests. He sees a man not wearing an endima gamu, a wedding garment. Endima comes from endio, meaning to sink into a garment, to put something on, not to carry it, not to display it, to inhabit it. And this word family stretches far beyond the parable. Paul uses the same root verb endio in Galatians 3, verse 27. As many of you as were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves endisasthi with Christ. Same word family, same putting on, same sinking into. Romans 13, verse 14. Put on the Lord Jesus Christ. Ephesians 4, verse 24. Put on the new self. Colossians 3, verse 10. Put on the new self, created in the image of the one who created it. And then Colossians 3, verse 12, the most striking use, as God's chosen eklektoi. Put on, endisasthe, compassion, kindness, humility. Look at that. Paul puts eklektoi and endio in the same sentence, the same two concepts from the parable. The chosen ones are the ones who put on. Paul is reading from the same page Matthew wrote. Every single time Paul describes inner transformation, he reaches for this verb, the garment verb, the sinking into verb, the word that does not mean perform or achieve or earn, but receive and wear and inhabit. The garment the man in the parable refuses to wear belongs to the same vocabulary Paul uses for becoming something entirely new. The endima gamu is the endio of the new self, and the man is standing in the feast hall without it. And this makes the king's question even more devastating. In the ancient Near East, kings commonly provided garments for their own feasts. Genesis 45, verse 22. Joseph gives changes of garments to his brothers. The host provides the clothing. The guest receives it. If the garments were provided, this man did not lack access. He refused what was offered. He entered the hall his own way, wearing what he already had on, declining the covering the king set out for every person at the table. You have experienced this. The moment when something was offered to you, not earned, not purchased, not negotiated, simply provided. And you stood there deciding whether to receive it, whether to let it cover you, whether to set down what you were already carrying and accept what was being handed to you instead. Endio is not performance. It is willingness, the willingness to be clothed by something you did not make and did not choose for yourself. Now the king speaks. Verse 12. Hetaire, how did you get in here without a wedding garment? Your English says friend. The Greek says something profoundly different. Hetaire is not philos. Philos is the warm word for a beloved friend. Jesus uses philos in John 15 when he tells his disciples, I have called you friends. Philos carries emotional bond, affection, closeness, personal warmth. Hetaire means comrade, associate, acquaintance. It is formal and distant, a surface word with no warmth underneath, a word of courtesy that hides the coldness of what is about to happen. And it appears only 3 times in the entire New Testament, all 3 in Matthew, all 3 confrontational. Matthew 20, verse 13. The vineyard owner to the worker who complained about wages. Hetaire, I'm not being unfair to you. That is a rebuke. The worker expected more. The owner names the entitlement and closes the conversation. Matthew 22, verse 12. The king to the garmentless man. Hetaire, how did you get in here without a wedding garment? That is an exposure. The man entered the hall but skipped the garment. The king names what everyone else can see. Matthew 26, verse 50. Jesus to Judas in the Garden of Gethsemane. Hetaire, do what you came for. That is devastation. The kiss has already landed. The betrayal is already in motion. And Jesus addresses it not with anger, but with the coldest possible form of recognition. 3 uses, 3 confrontations. Every single time this word appears, something terrible follows. It is courtesy without warmth, formality without affection. The address you use when the relationship has already ended, and the only thing left is the naming of what happened. You know this moment, when someone calls you by your title instead of your name. When the voice shifts from familiar to official. When the register drops from warm to formal, and you feel it land in your stomach before your mind even catches up. That is what hetaire sounds like in the Greek. And the king is using it inside a feast hall, at a wedding, speaking to a man who thought his presence was enough. The king does not address this man with tenderness. He does not offer a second chance. He addresses him with the Judas Word. the same word that falls on the lips of the one confronting a betrayer who is already past the point of rescue. And now the text gives the man's reaction. Verse 12 continued, and he was speechless. But the Greek verb behind speechless is not silence. It is not embarrassment. It is not the loss of words. It is something far more violent. Your English says speechless. The Greek word Matthew chose is the same word Jesus used to silence a storm on the Sea of Galilee. And it changes everything about what is happening in this room. Every English translation reads the same way. The man was speechless. That sounds like he had nothing to say, like he froze, like the awkward silence of someone caught at a party wearing the wrong thing, a social mishap, an embarrassment. The Greek word is ephimothe. It comes from the Greek verb phimoo, and phimoo does not mean to be silent. It does not mean to be at a loss for words. It means to muzzle, to close the mouth with a physical restraint, to gag. Every major Greek lexicon confirms the primary definition, to shut the mouth the way you would muzzle an animal. This is the same verb used in Mark chapter 4, verse 39. Jesus stands in the boat during the storm on the sea. He speaks to the wind and the waves. The Greek is pephimoso, be muzzled, and stay muzzled, a permanent gag order spoken to a raging sea. This is the same verb used in Mark chapter 1, verse 25. Jesus confronts a demon in the synagogue at Capernaum. Phimotheti, be muzzled. Same word, same force. The authority that closes the mouth of an unclean spirit is the same authority that closes the mouth of the garmentless man at the wedding feast. And the form of the word matters. Ephimothe tells you the action was done to him. He was muzzled. Something outside him imposed the silence. He did not choose humility. He did not voluntarily go quiet. He did not run out of arguments. An authority above him shut his mouth the way a hand shuts the mouth of a storm. You know this moment, when something is so true about you that your jaw physically will not form the defense, not because you chose humility, because the truth arrived with a force that closed your mouth for you. That is phimoo, the muzzle, and the passage uses the same one on this man that Jesus uses on the sea. Then verse 13 escalates further. The king tells his diakonoi, his attendants, bind him hand and foot. The word for bind is desantis, from deo, and deo carries enormous weight across the New Testament. It is the same verb Jesus uses in Matthew 16, verse 19. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Same verb. Same root in Matthew 12, verse 29. First bind the strong man, then plunder his house. Same root in Revelation chapter 20, verse 2. The angel seized the dragon and bound him for 1,000 years. Binding in the New Testament is the language of authority over forces that resist, hand and foot, total incapacitation, unable to act with the hands, unable to walk with the feet, unable to reach for anything or move toward anything, frozen in place. And the irony is devastating. The man who refused to put on, endio, the offered garment, is now forcibly bound, deo. Two different verbs of covering and restraint. One was offered freely. The other is imposed by force. He declined free clothing. He receives involuntary chains. You know this pattern. The thing you refuse to put on voluntarily eventually becomes the thing that constrains you involuntarily. The change you will not choose becomes the rigidity you cannot escape. Endio offered, deo imposed. The parable maps both outcomes from the same doorway, and then the destination. Verse 13. Cast him into Decoded to exoteron, the outer darkness. Most people hear outer darkness and picture a place, a fixed location, a geography called hell. But exoteron does not mean outer the way English uses that word, as if it names a fixed address. The Greek word means further out, more outside. It is built to show direction, not location. A movement away from the lighted feast hall, away from the warmth of center. The Septuagint uses this same word in Ezekiel for the outer court of the temple, the zone furthest from the Holy of Holies. Not a separate building, not a punishment chamber. The same structure, they're at the maximum possible distance from center. The spatial logic is consistent. The man is not sent to a foreign location. He is moved in a direction, away from center, further out from the feast, further from the light. This is correspondence, not medical claim. Map, not prescription. We are decoding a text, not prescribing a treatment. In this reading, the outer darkness corresponds to the distance that grows when the invitation is heard but the garment is never worn. not a sentence imposed from outside. A direction that begins the moment the offered covering is refused. The feast stays lit, the man moves further from it, muzzled, bound hand and foot, cast further out. 3 verbs, 3 stages, and then the passage delivers its final line. The one everyone quotes without reading the parable that contains it. Many are called, few are chosen. But after what you have just seen, those 2 Greek words do not mean what you thought they meant. And the difference between them is something no English translation has ever shown you. Matthew 22, verse 14. Poloi gar isin kletoi, oligoi de eklektoi. For many are called, but few are chosen. Kletoi, from kaleo, to call, to summon, to invite. It names the state of having been invited. Everyone at the crossroads heard the call. Everyone gathered into the hall from the exits of the highways received the summons. Kletoi is the widest circle, the open door, the table set for anyone who would come. Eklektoi, from eklegomai, to choose out, to select for quality, a completely different verb. But Matthew places it right next to kletoi in the same breath. Invited and selected, summoned and refined. 2 different Greek words set side by side to create a contrast no Greek-speaking listener could miss. The invited who became select, the summoned who became fitted, the ones who heard the call and then became what the occasion required. And Revelation chapter 17, verse 14, completes the progression that the parable only begins. Kletoi kai eklektoi kai pistoi, called and chosen and faithful. 3 stages, not 2. Called is the widest door, chosen is the narrower passage. Faithful pistoi is the innermost room. The parable gives you the first 2. Revelation adds the third, and the direction is always the same, inward, closer to center. The exact opposite of exoteron. You see the geometry now. The man was cast exoteron, further out. The progression in Revelation moves the other direction. Kletoi, eklektoi, pistoi. Each step moves inward, closer to the center of what is being offered. The feast is the center. The outer darkness is the edge. And between them stands one act, whether you put on what was provided. Now pull the threads together. In the second chapter, you saw that eklektos means fitted, choice, pure. A quality word describing what someone has become. Not a lottery, not a finger pointed from heaven. A readiness that the text itself measures by what the person is wearing. In the third chapter, you heard the king use the Judas word, hetaire, to address the man who lacked that readiness. Not a warm appeal, not a gentle second chance, a cold formal exposure. The same word spoken at the moment of betrayal. In the fourth chapter, you watched the muzzle fall, phimoo, the same force that gags storms and silences demons. Then the binding, deo, the same verb that restrains the strong man and chains the dragon. Then the direction, exoteron, further out, further from center, further from the feast. The parable is not a lottery. It is a sequence. The garment is offered, the garment is declined. The Judas word falls, the muzzle lands, the binding follows. The direction reverses from inward to outward. And at the end, one line. Many kletoa, few eklektoi. Many invited, few refined. Many heard the call, few let it change what they were wearing. You know the difference between hearing something and letting it change you. Between attending a room and being present in it. Between sitting at a table and being prepared for what the table requires. That is the contrast Matthew draws. Kletoa and eklektoi, invited and refined. Two different words placed side by side to name the distance between showing up and being ready. Two words. That is the entire contrast Matthew draws. Called and chosen, invited and fitted, being at the table and being ready for the room. And there is a phrase in this passage you can take with you. Not a theology, not a doctrine to argue about, a practice, something you can do in under 3 minutes that mirrors the one act the parable says makes the difference. The parable gives us one act that separates the many from the few. Not a list of behaviors, not a creed to memorize, not a doctrine to defend. One act, putting on the garment, endio, to sink into, not to perform, not to earn, not to fabricate, to receive what was provided and let it rest on you. The practice is built from endimagamu in Matthew 22, verse 11, and from Paul's use of endio in Galatians 3, verse 27. It mirrors the structure of the parable itself. The feast is already prepared. The garment is already provided. The only question is whether you wear it. First, sit or stand wherever you are. Quiet the room. Close what is open. Let the noise settle for a moment. and call to mind one thing you have been invited into that you have been attending but not wearing. A relationship you said yes to but have not let change you. A commitment you made but carry at arm's length. A calling you sense but hold outside yourself like something on a shelf instead of something on your skin. Name it silently. Do not analyze it. Just name it. That is your keklemenus, your prior yes. The thing you already agreed to before you walked into this room. Second, recall the Greek, endio, to sink into. Not to perform, not to strive for, not to display for others, to put on the way you put on a garment in the morning, not something you carry in your hands. Something that covers your shoulders. Take one slow breath, and in that breath, let the named thing rest on you like a garment rather than a task sitting in front of you. Feel the shift, the difference between holding something at arm's length and letting it settle across your back and your chest. That is the difference the parable is measuring. Not whether you arrived at the hall, not whether you believe the feast is real, whether you wore what was offered once you got there. Third, recall that the feast is already finished, tethamena, already slaughtered, hetoimos, already prepared. You are not preparing the feast. You are not constructing the garment from scratch. You are not earning the seat at the table. Everything that needed to be done has been done. The Greek told you that in verse 4. The sacrifice is complete. The table is set. The door is open. You are not building the room. You are deciding what you wear into it. That is the practice, not a program, not a system, not a technique. It is the single act the parable identifies as the dividing line between kletoa and eklektoi, between the invited and the refined, between the many who heard and the few who wore it. You can do this in under 3 minutes, before a conversation, before you walk into a room, before you sit down to a meal with someone. Name the invitation, recall endio, let it settle on you, and remember that the feast was ready before you arrived. The parable does not end with instructions. It does not end with a checklist or program to follow. It ends with a distinction, kletoa or eklektoi, invited or refined, called or chosen. The feast is ready, the garment is here, the door is open, endio, sink into it.